lead me down a path and then I'll walk it.
Pat Anderson, co-founder and coordinator at Professional Supervising Associates. Welcome to Luncheon a Divorce Lawyer.
Thank you very much, Peter. My pleasure.
Well, it's great to have one of the real icons of the Circuit Court of Cook County. One of the real. I'm calling you're an institution. You're an institution. Well, you've been really a great resource for many years, I think, that most people would say. So Pat, here's just kind of an open question. Sort of what do you do and sort of how did you get there? I know you say you've been doing it a while. So what, take me back. How did you start doing, I guess for, my phraseology would be kind of, running an organization that facilitates supervised parenting time. How did you kind of get into that world?
An interesting story. I didn't go looking for it. It found me. And I knew very little about it, had never encountered it. And some out there have heard this story before. I had a partner, and actually I jumped in to help him. His background had nothing to do with this. His background was journalism, and he worked for media sources and ultimately wound up with an association in Chicago that was for various media people. And when he was 50-something, the association decided to leave Chicago and eliminate all their staff, with the exception of a Pulitzer Prize-winning editor who put out their house organ. And he found himself looking for a job. And it turned out his close and best friend from first grade was a very active GAL, and literally called him up one day in the middle of job searching and said, "I've got a little boy. He needs to see his mother. I know you're home. Put on a jacket." And off he went. And then somebody else called, and he and I were working on a couple of projects. We had been both together in many community situations, and we were working on some community things. And I said to him, I see a niche here. You're getting these calls. And he said, yes, but he said, I'm one person. I can't cover this. And, it's very new to me. And so I basically said, well, I think maybe, we can talk to your friend, your GAL, who I actually knew. He was from the same town. And I said, I think maybe we can get this set up. So to fast forward a little jump in time, he said, Pat, I just can't have people I don't know. These are children. And he said, will you do it with me? And I said, sure, I will do it with you until we get it started. And then you're on your own. Well, we know how that worked out. So be very careful what you say you're going to do. Right. 3.5 decades later, here I am. And he is now supervising an angel corps. But we really started out, we were both very experienced with people. We were not very experienced with the court system. So that was what we had to learn. And we had to make some decisions because there was really nothing with the state or anywhere else that had guidelines for what we were doing. And we just put our best game faces on and decided that we really were going to take this seriously and tried to do our homework, ask questions. And a gentleman by the name of Lee Howard, who was Jim's friend, was kind enough to take us down to talk to a few judges. And that was really how we began. It was not something either of us ever thought would happen. And from there, we kind of built our guidelines, our rules. The guidelines that I send out today are like a living history of what we do. Every time something new came along, it became a policy or a guideline, starting even going back with the very first case that came up where Jim went down and picked up a 4-year-old little boy downtown from his father and drove him. We don't drive anymore, but for insurance reasons. But back then we were starting out. And he would take this little boy to meet his mother at the Chicago Historical Museum. And Jim said, you wouldn't believe this. He said, this little boy, he said, he's yelling, you're not my dad. I don't want to go. So rule number 1 was born. We need to be appointed. I said, if I saw a little boy going down the street saying, you're not my dad, I don't want to go, I would call the police. So that was how that rule was born. And from there on, just about every guideline we have stemmed off of something that was practical. So that's how we got from that point to this point.
Wow. So was your background, what's your, I don't know,
My background was really,
educationally
kind of
or social work or something,
oh,
or totally far
no,
afield
it
from
wasn't.
stuff related to children?
No, well, yes and no. My major in college was elementary education, which
Okay.
I spent some time. I did work with children voluntarily in a number of fields with various backgrounds and organizations. But my actual work experience was pretty varied. I worked for city government for a while. I worked for a
Hmm.
Fortune 500 company for a while. Um, I was in real estate for a while when my children were young to have that flexibility. And basically, I have a laundry list that's very long of volunteer work,
Okay.
and as did Jim. Not necessarily the same thing. Between the two of us, we covered a lot of territory. And basically, that was what we fell back on. We were both people that were very used to people and being in situations where we had to assess those people. But neither of us were really very exposed to the legal system.
I
And
see.
as I love to tell people, I always looked at court. I never made a differentiation between the different areas of legal work. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was sort of like the old Bible story. You go to the king and you say, King, I have a problem. And the king says, well, let me solve this. Okay, here's what you do. And I say, thank you, King. Here's 2 chickens. And I leave. So we spent a lot of time in the early years, Jim and I, in court, watching the
Mm.
procedures being went to learn that side of it. Because what we do is really a very hybrid animal. It is not really social work.
Right.
At least not in our mind. We had to kind of develop what this was. And now a number of our people now are retired. Most of them are, if they have the credentials we want. They'd still be making more money. But some of them have social work backgrounds. Some of them are retired counselors for drug and alcohol abuse. We've had retired teachers. We've had retired lawyers even.
Sure.
It has to have, just some bearing on what we do. But most important to both Jim and I when we started is our people all have to have raised children.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important to us. You have to have gone through that procedure. You have to be able to
Right.
have some knowledge of, you can read the books till the cows come home, but we want you to have walked that path.
Yeah.
And that's really where it goes. So we try to get involved here and keep things focused on this very neutral role that we have, which is really a little bit like the center of all the cases the divorce attorneys have and the judges have. We're like that middle section of a book. We don't have the first 3 chapters. We don't have the last 3 chapters. We're thrown into the middle. And our role is just to follow what has been decided by others. Now, some of the people we have are very qualified to be mediators and what have you, but we decided early on that was not going to be what we did. So we just basically are the extended eyes and ears of the court and the lawyers on the case.
When you started, were some of the places like your Apnagar, Mujeres Latinas, were there alternatives to you at that point? I mean, there aren't really great alternatives to you currently, but there are some. Was there anything at that point?
Yeah, well, what I was aware of, and if I had to put a number on it, I would say it took both Jim and I maybe 5 years to really have some comfortable, idea of what was really involved. And Apnagar I was aware of very early on. The others, because as I say, it was a building process of the areas we covered.
Right.
It was maybe a little later before I was aware of some of the others. How long they've been there? Apnagar was there, I believe, when we started. Apnagar is partially funded by the state, and so his family affairs. There's some of the other counties that have similar. They all tend to operate pretty much the same way by, it's maybe 1 hour once a week type of thing with varying things that go on. They have evolved a little bit too, and they serve a function because they're partially subsidized, so that means they can have a sliding scale. We can't because we are not subsidized. So,
Right.
but we do keep it low. I mean, our rates have always been kept lower than anybody else's because we have no overhead. We don't work out of an office. You're talking to the entire staff, for better or for worse. And we
Right.
basically assigned it for just enough to get the people to agree to leave their families and go out and do this. So that's what the options were. But my understanding was, before we actually started creating this, what was told to me is essentially no, there was no other group or organization that was doing off-site visitation. And what was conveyed to me was literally, it was not uncommon for an attorney to turn to his paralegal or somebody in the office and say, go sit. So that was what I was told. I can't swear to that, but I don't know of any other groups that were actually doing off-site at that time.
Huh. So yeah, could we talk through a little bit of what, just sort of like a hypothetical, or kind of like what a process looks like with you? Because I think that is very unique. You use the word off-site. I think sometimes when I'm talking to our clients, I call you ride along. Is that? But you said you don't drive anymore, so I guess
We don't drive, but we're with the we
we
ride along. Ride along is probably more accurate, because if the kids are in a car, we're in the car with them. I've had people say to me, "Well, do you follow them?" Well, that wouldn't be very practical. No, we're with the children, and unless there's some type of restriction. If the parent can't drive and there's no problem with it, they can choose somebody to drive for them, chauffeur us around. We just don't drive. We stopped very early on for the liability.
Yeah,
but we're in the car with the kids.
Right. And so, what a fair summary of I mean, I feel like as an attorney, you have sort of three supervised options. This is my oversimplified, but I think it's accurate too. Oftentimes people will use sort of a mutual relative or something, I have a case right now where grandma, the dad's mom is the supervisor. Alternative would be sort of the centers, if you will, the DuPage County Family Center, APNIGAR. Like I said, there are a few city funded ones. Branch Family Institute, I think, still does it. And then there would be, I guess, off-site, such as your organization. Is that a fair summary of kind of the generic options?
Yes. And off-site is kind of a catch-all word, because some of the groups and agencies out there do operate out of offices, and they may, I have not really tracked that, they may be willing to do it in their office. We have never operated out of an office. So that's why I've always referred to off-site, not meaning the people, but meaning us. So we do real world, out there and about. It serves a function. You get to some of the things that are being brought up as a matter of concern. There are times when the only good way to get any feedback is to actually be in a real world setting. Right. And so that's where we come in handy. And we, as I say, we're there. We are not little wooden soldiers. There's probably the biggest hurdle is this is something that everybody assumes they know how it operates. And the assumptions vary from person to person, whether it's the attorneys, the clients, whomever. Some, as I was told one time, your job is just to observe, be quiet, stand there, just watch. And being the devilish person I am, I said, so if Johnny's on Lakeshore Drive, I just get the license plate of the car, right? And so no, I mean, we try to make this situation as normal as the situation can be. And by that, I mean, so that it seems it's social. That's all it is. We are not functioning as mediators or therapists. A little of that creeps in just out of necessity, but that is not our primary role. So you try to be more like Aunt Sarah or Uncle Henry. You will talk to the people if they talk to you. If there's a board game going on and they need a fourth, okay, we can do that. Some of the children set the pace. Some children are so eager to be with the parent that you'll find that they resent a stranger involved. And we respect that. We do what we have to do, and we, just kind of pull back. Some of them hang on to us like we are the last lifeboat on the Titanic. And you have to kind of feed through that to get them to the point where they can understand this is just social. So that helps. It takes about, I would say, 2 visits before we start getting into a little bit of what I call a false norm, where people relax and they become
Mhm.
in tune with what we're there for. And it goes fairly well in most cases.
So to talk through maybe just logistics or what your process looks like, on my end, this is what I
Hmm.
think, and you can, maybe I'm one of the bad lawyers who aren't doing like what you want or something, but right, I mean, oftentimes I would lay out in a court order the parameters of some parenting time that needs to be supervised, perhaps
Hmm.
for 4 to 6 hours on a Sunday. And then
Hmm.
you and your organization would be placed in the order. Pat Anderson, Professional Supervising Associates, is appointed as the supervisor. And then what happens next? I mean, if that's sort of an accurate
Yeah,
description,
no,
the
that's
legal
pretty spot
side,
on.
you get a court
Right.
order. Then what happens? Just then the clients kind of logistics with you, or sometimes obviously the attorneys are involved, but kind of like what does it look like, or
Well,
in
everybody's
an
involved.
ideal situation, like what do you do from that point? I guess it's really I'm just trying to get you to kind of talk about your process and what kind of like parenting time looks
Right.
like with you.
Well, to that end, you're spot on. Everybody has an involvement. What I usually do is I'll get a call from, well, what's happened since people are home in the last couple of years is some of the newer attorneys, color counties that, we originally were so ingrained in Cook County, but we're now covering 4 counties. And
Hmm.
the newer ones that aren't used to our routine,
What
it
are
takes a
they?
little
Just
while.
just for my knowledge, Cook and what else?
Well, Cook, Lake, Will, Kane. It depends on, and
Okay,
to
just
that extent, before you get too
curious.
excited with that, we are only 14 people. And
Understood.
of those 14 people not working in an office, they're in various locations.
Sure.
And so in those counties, that number of people, perhaps depending on the county, in proximity, we might only have 2 people, 3 people,
Understood.
that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, right now I'm going through a transition because basically in Chicago on the south side, I'm experiencing kind of a void because the people that have covered that, well, I mean, time goes on. One retired and
Mhm.
left on a medical leave, and 2 moved. So I
Right.
mean, it's a fluid situation,
Sure.
and we do go to other places. We don't have boundaries, but
Right.
we charge travel time. It wouldn't make sense. For example,
For sure.
if you're in Aurora, I'm not going to put you on a case in Gurnee. It just wouldn't
Oh,
make
right.
sense.
Right.
So that kind of thing. So scheduling becomes a little bit interesting. And but going back to that, I can digress in so many areas. Going back to your
Yeah. No.
original
Yeah. Just kind of wanted to,
question,
just get you to lay out sort of, like what it looks like once you guys are sort of
right?
on
Well,
board.
what happened is when COVID came in and people were working from home, many of the attorneys, some of the attorneys that I've known forever know how we operate, and it was pretty much following that routine. But many of the newer ones would give their client, oh, well, here's 3 numbers of 3 groups. Call and find one. Well,
Right.
my last name is A. I get that first call. And so I would literally spend about anywhere from an hour to 2 hours with these people because they had no idea, not just what supervision was, but
Right.
frankly, what the whole process they were in was.
Mm.
And so you're kind of Mirandizing yourself so you don't just overstep your boundaries. But the catchphrase is, well, you would go back to your attorney about that, but here's what we do. So you would go through the process. I was getting phone calls that were basically what I called inquiry calls. You don't know if they're coming back or not. They would go back to their attorney and say yes or no or whatever. But then we would have to figure out if we could fit it into the schedule, because another change in the last probably 8 years is early on, the visits averaged once a week. And then about 8 years ago, we started getting orders allowing parents 3-4 days a week. And these cases hung on. You know, when I think back to the early days, our average time on a case was 3 months. Our average time on a case now, I mean, I wouldn't even put a number on it. It would probably cause people to start dropping like flies. It goes on. It goes on. And if they come in and don't go out, you can tell the problem, right?
Right. So I'm just thinking, I'm not going to name names, but I'm thinking through a case of ours you were involved with, and I think you actually still are at some level, maybe. So, you know, let's just say a woman has supervised parenting time and is sort of the start of things. Generally, you're you know, maybe you're connecting with the parent on kind of like, hey,
Yes.
where are you? And or are they suggesting where to take their child or children? Or are you kind of using your box of public places? Or what does that kind of look like in sort of setting up a visit? Yeah.
All of the above. I mean, when you talk to the parents, going to the basic level, just when you're notified you've been assigned. And the first thing I do, no matter who it is that makes that contact, I tell them I need orders that address visitation, not orders that cover the whole world, but whatever orders cover. I need copies of those because you can't violate an order. And we need contact information. That's critical. I need mom and dad's contact or whoever guardian is there. Attorneys, we need to know if there are attorneys, how to contact them. So when I have all those numbers, then the next step is to reach out to the parties themselves. And because one side, you've got to find out when they're available. We've got 3 people that have to coordinate a day and a time. And just like anything else in life, that's not always easy. And plus, you've got people, many of them are upset, angry, you know, and then on top of it, they have the joy of being assigned a supervisor, which sounds very punitive.
Right.
So after you talk to them for a few minutes, you know, and I kind of go through things, they relax a little bit when they realize that we're not there to be, you know, like the kiddie police. We're there for different purposes, and we ask about their availability, and then we coordinate that. Then I try to find a supervisor that has an opening that can cover that, and go back to all the parties, let them know, yes, we're ready to go. That process takes at least a week because we don't work out of an office. This all involves phone calls. The parties to the supervisors, back and forth, and, you know, even me, as you well know, Peter. I mean, I'm out and about too, so you're doing this on spread. So there's a little bit of a lag time getting started. But once you've got that in place, then we look at it as a schedule. It's set. We hold that time. And we let them know what the process is for cancellation and how much notice we need and the little details. But we hold a schedule, and basically our attitude is once we're appointed, we're on, and we're on until somebody tells us we're off.
I see.
And it's just open-ended that way. So that would be the process. I would talk to them. I would send them our guidelines. We would discuss day, time, location. Location is critical because my people have to know where they have to be. And that's been sometimes one of the most difficult things because you've got people frequently that live at vast polar opposite places, and deciding where you're going to transfer the children and how it's going to be done. That can take a little time. But once we've got it, we've got it. And then we've got a schedule, and the parents will get a photograph of the supervisor, that supervisor's name, and their mobile phone number. So they know exactly who they'll be meeting with.
That's great. Yeah, you hinted at this, and I don't want to keep you too long, Pat, and I have a commitment too, but I was always kind of thinking about like sort of, like what the tone or the feelings or sort of emotions you would be getting necessarily from the, you know, the parent who's stuck with supervised parenting time, because right? I feel like from where I'm sitting or just observing from the outside, I would be kind of, hey, I'm annoyed. Why do I have this supervision? But conversely, in your role, it's like you're the one who's actually like facilitating and allowing them to basically maintain that relationship throughout whatever's going on. I'm just wondering, yeah, do
Well,
you get more negative or
they
gratitude, or do they warm to you with
both,
your
both.
personality
I
over
mean,
time?
for as many people as many people as there exist, there's a different feeling about this. Yes, sometimes they
Yeah,
are very resentful. Sometimes we are viewed as just an extension of everything they're angry about.
yeah,
Other times
yeah,
they view us as um, as sort of a unofficial advocate, which we have to be very careful of. We try not to be unfriendly, but it's a very thin line because we don't advocate, But
right,
we're
right,
sensible. We're sensible about the kids. We're sensible about the situation. We just keep harping to keep everybody that this is just social. And once we're there, one of the things that's kind of interesting, maybe it's a form of Stockholm syndrome, I don't know, but once they get used to a supervisor, most of them are very reluctant to have a substitute. It's like, I'm
yeah,
used to this person, I
yeah,
don't want another new person. But as I say, it depends on the person, it depends on the situation. And what we do is often misconstrued. I have people I know that work with us as clients that think that we're just glorified babysitters, because
right,
it's sort of like it's a little bit like being a steward or a stewardess on an airplane. We're just there to give out water and coffee unless the plane is going down. And does that
right,
happen? Yes, yes it can. Yes it can.
sure. And yeah, I mean, right. I mean, you do, I don't think with a, well, I don't know your frequency, but oftentimes you'll do a report and sometimes you'll be directly involved in the litigation, won't you?
Yes, well, we're one of the last that are still putting reports out. They're time consuming.
Yeah.
I'm sort of a log jam. I mean, I know the like Apnagar and the different on-site will not do reports anymore. They're very time
Mm,
consuming.
I would
And
imagine.
so, yeah, well, for example, in my case, I have the supervisors provide me with information, and I will ultimately take their information, but it will go through me to go out for two reasons. One is it keeps me informed because I get the
Right.
first phone calls of what's going on. And the other is I have some idea of what, talking to the various attorneys and things, what they're looking for. And
Hmm.
everybody has a different area of expertise, which causes them to write differently. And so if it goes
Sure.
through me, I can kind of make it common. But that, yeah, it takes a lot of time to get a report together.
Is there
But it's
a,
out there.
um, and just sort of maybe a bullet or two, just as we run out of time, sort of maybe, hey, this is sort of what, maybe a best practice or kind of a good approach you see maybe from a parent who's in the situation versus kind of like, I don't know, the way not to handle it set resonate, kind of like, what does a good
There's a
visit look
few
like versus, sort of, boy, that was not great for everybody, including the child.
there's a few categories in supervision, just as there are in your cases. And one of the things, if they are represented, we often remind them that you need to trust your attorney and talk to your attorney. That's the person that's there to represent you. That's where it goes
Hmm.
into what we learned so many years ago as to the function of the court. And I'm sympathetic to the people because I remember how I felt trying to figure out, how all this worked. And so
Right.
they'll ask us questions, and we have to be very careful that we don't give information but at the same time don't ignore the question, to direct them to the
Right.
right place. So
Sure.
to that extent, probably the only big no don't is so many people, and just from a human standpoint, I get it, really want their children, quote unquote, to know the truth. And they want to
Sure.
explain to them, how this happened. And we really have to sit on that and explain, hard as it is, whether you think you're right, whether you are right. The kids, and the children will ask questions. Children in many ways are very precocious. And the hard part is to give them a little assistance in how to deflect those questions without looking like you're ignoring them, and stay focused on the fact that these meetings are not mediative, or the time is not for that. That's a big thing I would pass along to anybody that's finding themselves in supervision. It's very difficult, but don't involve the children, and don't ask the children to ask for things or do things. They're not little mediators. So we try to keep it, just enjoy the time. Enjoy the time.
Hey, well, and grateful to have you jump on here, Pat. Here, last two questions. I'll make them compound, and maybe we could just get it quick. Is there most here? This is just kind of a funny aside. Like, most common, either a specific or type of place where parenting time happens in your world, and then just where can people find you if an attorney or whatever needs your services?
Well, we're on the approved list if they go in under under supervisors.
So you're on that list. The Cook, well, I don't know all the other counties, but I know, there's definitely that list on the domestic relations portion of the Cook County Court website.
We are there. The guidelines that are posted there, I think we're the only ones with guidelines posted, but the guidelines that are posted there are a little out of date. They haven't asked for an update, but they're basically still the same and accurate.
Yeah.
And that's one place. But the other thing is truly, it's through usually the court system or the attorneys. No, we don't advertise. We don't work for the parties. That is a big misconception. That we don't hire. We're not for hire. That's why we look at ourselves as extensions of the court insofar as we are following the court order. But other than that, usually the attorneys can find our name, or the individuals can find our name if they look up under those guidelines, under those lists.
Sounds good. Yeah,
I know
where you find you.
Do we have a yes, you do. Do we have a web page? No, we don't. And the reason for that is not because we're trying to be underground. We just haven't needed one. We have more than we can manage. So, but other than that, now where they can find us, and your other question, I kind of lost in the compound there.
I was just asking kind of a fun little, like, where do people like to go on their visits, right? You're getting like 2 to 4 hour visits. What's the most popular kind of, is it a museum? Is it a restaurant? Is it a mall? Or is it just kind of all of the above?
It's everything, depending on the ages. One of the interesting things, Peter, is in the last 2 years, and this swings. We have variations. We've had a huge influx in under 2 age children.
Oh, younger
infants
children.
Under 2. I mean, they seem to go in cycles. Then for a while we had older children. So where you go depends a lot on the age of the child.
For sure.
We do residences. Residences are pretty common, but there are many cases that are required to be in public. One of the big things, now that I have your ear and hopefully others, there is a tendency on a court order, particularly since COVID, to say, meet in a park. Oh, please don't do that. First of all, that has us wondering every Friday night if we're going to meet on Saturday, depending on the weather. And connecting in a park is very difficult. You can go to a park, just don't assign that as the transfer point.
I see.
What we look for a transfer point, what we need, whether it's in residence or in a public place, we need a place where the supervisor can park their car without getting it ticketed or towed. And we can meet in front of a home. We like the parents not to have direct contact during those transfers. We have
Right.
found that it stresses the children. So we will tell one parent, if the one parent's driving to a location or both are, please stay in your cars. Supervisor will, shuttle the children between you. If you're staying at a public location and one parent's dropping off, we'll come to the car. We'll tell the other parent, go inside the entrance of wherever you are. Same thing when you're leaving. If it's in a residence, we ask the person who lives there, stay behind the door, the party dropping off. So we keep that little bit of a buffer, and we shuttle the children between that. The question I ask frequently is, if we're meeting at a certain location, is there any restriction for the person visiting to drive? Because we will allow them to go anywhere that we feel is appropriate for the children. And if they have a driver's license that they can show us, and car seats for the kids if it's needed.
Right.
So unless it's in
Okay.
an order, there's that aspect.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
That's very helpful. And Pat, thank you for joining me, and grateful to have you as a resource. And I always recommend you around. We obviously use you in our firm, and I think you're the best option. You're the best option I know of. So thanks again for joining us.
Except for getting my video straight, honey.
Well,
Yes.
I'll have my assistant. We'll do some editing before the podcast gets posted, and we'll leave it there. But thanks again, Pat.
You're very welcome, Peter. Thank you.
All right. Take care.